everybody, it's Angel from Halo Inspirations. We give you inspirations to help you spread beauty and joy through your quilting journey. Today's tutorial is just an introduction to stitch in the ditch. Some people use stitch in the ditch to get their 3 layers quilted, and that's it. That's what I'm doing today. I'm using it to actually get this table runner quilted to make sure that everything is together. But some people go a step further with that and they still actually do more quilting around it and they use it as a stabilizer. I'm not doing that today. It is stabilizing everything. It is holding everything together. It's making sure those sandwiches are quilted and as last the lifetime that it will. And that's what I'm going to be showing you today. And stitch in a ditch is exactly what it sounds like. We are going to be stitching in those seams, which we're calling ditches, okay? Some people like to sew like 1/8 of an inch away from it or up to 1/4 of an inch away from that line. I'm actually going to be, as best as I can, trying to sew and stitch in the seam. So I'm going to be doing some stitching and ditching in the seam as best as possible. So I'm going to show you how I do that. So what kind of things are you going to need? First and foremost, I use the walking foot. I know you've heard it before. I use this thing for a lot, and I'm going to use it for this too. And it's actually kind of important in doing this because, you know, we have feed dogs inside our sewing machine. And the job of those feed dogs is to grab that fabric from underneath and help guide it through your machine as you're piecing or as you're sewing, okay? It grabs that fabric and pulls it through. When you have 3 layers, you can, the top layer can shift, okay? What this is doing is it has its own feed dog. So you've got that crazy arm, and as that arm goes up and down, it activates its own feed dogs. So when the feed dogs come down, the ones on your machine come up, and from both the top and the bottom, they're gripping your fabrics and pulling it through. Then they come up at the same time, they come down and they pull the next parts through. So the idea is that you have less shifting of your fabric. And I love this thing because I use it for a lot of different things. And that's what we're going to be using today. One thing about this crazy arm, and I'll show you whenever I pull you in closer, this arm, depending on how your walking foot is designed, some of them are just a bar and it would just lay on top of your needle bar. So as your needle bar goes up and down, this arm will go up and down. This one actually has a groove. So I'm going to put my needle bar, it's going to go around my needle bar, okay? So it's very important that you load this correctly. And when I pull you in closer to when I'm going to be doing some actual stitching so you can see firsthand how I'm doing my best to get in that ditch, I'll show you how this one is particularly loaded. Now, like I said, some don't have this groove and it just simply needs to lay on top. But if you don't have that up and down movement with the needle bar, your feed dogs aren't going to move. And you're going to wonder why in the world is your walking foot not working? And that just may be the answer. So we're using a walking foot. I'm actually going to be using some quilting gloves too. I really enjoy these because they've got grippies on them at the tips. So as I'm putting my hands down and my fingertips down on my fabric and I'm helping to keep it straight or along that ditch line, I have more control over that fabric. It really helps me to control it, you know, and have less slippage of my hands, okay? So I'm going to be using those. Thread. I'm very partial to Aurifil 100% cotton thread. It is absolutely gorgeous. It works so well with fabric. And it's strong enough. It's very strong and it holds everything. It holds its quilting together. And it doesn't break all the time. So, you know, I've tried other 50 weight, 100% cotton threads from various other companies, and my machine just doesn't like it. So what'll happen is I'll be stitching along and a thread will break. I got to stop. I got to rethread, you know, the whole story over and over because it just keeps breaking. I do not have that trouble with Aurifil thread at all. And my machine loves it. I love it. We're happy together. Now your machine or your preference may be something different. I'm just letting you know what I use. The other thing about Aurifil 100% cotton thread, it has low lint. So my lint's not building up along my needle or my thread and eventually causing thread breakage. So it's my preference, and I just want to share that, but I also understand there's a lot of people that like other types of thread, and that's what their machine prefers, that's what they prefer, and everything works so well together. Perfect. But if you're still new and you're trying to figure it out, I would encourage you to try Aurifil thread. I use it to piece, I use it to quilt, I use it for everything. I even use it to bind. So every single process, I use Aurifil thread. Now, as far as my needle, I usually use a quilting needle, which is actually a specialty needle, and it's 90-14 is the size. However, I'm out and I'm waiting on the shipment to come in. So I am actually using a titanium quilting needle of 80-11. And I'm not going to lie to you, I was a little nervous because I do prefer 90-14, but it's doing a great job. So I'm using 80-11 today. Everything looks super fantabulous, wonderful with it, but I do still prefer my 90-14. It's just my preference, but I want to let you know either one seems to be working really well. Now, if you're having a lot of thread breakage and you're dealing with some things, depending on the weight of your thread, you really want to focus on the size of your needle, okay? But I'm using an 80-11 with 50 weight Aurifil thread, a walking foot, some gloves, my topper that's been basted to my backing with the batting in between, and we are ready to do some stitching and the ditching. Before I actually get started, I'm going to bring you in close to one of the placemats that I have finished because I want to talk a little bit about directional sewing and the importance behind that. And that's the best way for me to do it with something smaller than this huge table runner. So I'm going to get my walking foot put on. I'm going to grab the placemat, get you set up, and we're going to do just a small chit chat about directional sewing, and then I'm going to get started and show you how to stitch in the ditch. So I'll see y'all in a second. Okay, so this is one of the placemats. They're already stitched together. What's really cool about stitching a ditch is you get the back side of exactly what you stitch on the front in a design manner. Now you'll see some gaps here, but this is going to be closed off with some binding. But you'll get these beautiful designs that you stitched on the back, okay? So it's kind of like getting two quilts for the price of one, right? Absolutely very cool thing that happens. But what I really wanted to talk to you about is with longer stitches or seams. So if you notice here, I've got these seams that I've done the stripes with. And what I have done is I started here and I went up, down, up, came out, and I went the opposite direction. With these longer seams, you really want to keep going in opposite directions every time you sew. So even if you had a block where you had a long seam here and a long seam here, you want to sew one direction and then turn around and sew the other direction. And the reason is, let's say you were going to sew some long strips together, okay? Sorry, I hit the camera. So what you would do is you put these two strips together and you sew your 1/4 inch seam along this direction. You'd open it up, press the seam out. Then if you just simply took another one, added it to it, sewed the same direction, If you just kept on doing that, what'll happen are eventually they'll make a turn. They'll have like a little bend. It's a natural thing that happens. So what you should do is you take your first two, you sew from here down, flip it over, and this time you would start from the other side, and that'll help eliminate that bend. It'll make it so it's more even because there's give and pull in each direction. Well, you want the same thing when you're thinking about stitching in the ditch on your quilt. If you've got long seams, sew one in one direction and sew the other in the other direction, especially when they're like far apart. So if I were to sew this, I could sew this seam together this way, or not together, but down in the ditch. And then this one I'd go the opposite direction, and then this one I'd go the opposite direction. So you're getting that give and pull, so you're not pulling your fabric in a certain direction to have a bend that may happen. So I wanted to point that out. The other thing is, if you're looking to make a quilting plan to have the least amount of threads, you know, drawing it out on graph paper or on notebook paper, or if your pattern gives you a coloring sheet or an outline, really take the time to figure out the best method to get it done. Now, I'll be honest with you, this Martha Washington star is in my table runner, and I think there are 6 of them. I don't know, there might be more, but there's going to be a lot of stop and starts. I'm going to have to bury threads. It is what it is, and at this point I'm not even worried about it. Now, I do have the stripes too, so I have a little idea on how to keep going backwards and having minimal amount of cutting threads so I don't have to bury as much. But inside these blocks, it just is what it is. So I'm going to show you how I stitch in the ditch using this pinwheel in the table runner. So that's what you're going to actually watch me do. And you know, the concept stays the same throughout the whole thing, but I really wanted to take you and explain about these long seams because you really want to pay attention to which direction, how many times you're going, so you don't get that bend in your fabric. Okay, so the first thing I want to show you is this bar, okay? Remember I told you on the walking foot I had a groove that will go around this needle bar. And why that's important, as my needle bar goes down and back up, as you can see here, so does this that's attached to the walking foot. Now watch my feed dogs. Goes down. When it goes up, the feed dogs go down. When it goes down, the feed dogs go up. Okay? So it's very important to have, some of them have grooves where the needle bar will sit inside, and some of them just have a bar that just sits right on top of this needle bar. So depending on how your walking foot is designed will determine how in fact you put your walking foot on. But if your walking foot's not walking, check this, because that just might be the culprit, okay? Now I noticed I'm not completely getting exactly where I want. I want to start in the center of this pinwheel. You're seeing me in here on this pinwheel, okay? This is what I'm going to sew. Now you can see all this fabric over here. I actually have it rolled. Usually I just scrunch the rest of the project or quilt. I just scrunch it in here, but this time I rolled it a little bit. This is my top thread. Typically, I will take my hand wheel and lower it where I want it to go, because I want it just perfect right in that center. Now this is a little tricky with this camera. Alright, so I'm going to lower it down. I'm actually going to push my button to lower the thread and lift it up. And at this point, I'm going to hold my thread right here and give it a little tug. Now I will say, when I cut threads on my machine, it cuts it really short. So what I end up doing is lifting it up, lifting my presser foot, give it a little more tug, and get my tweezers in here to grab my bobbin thread. So there's my top thread. I can see my bobbin thread. I'm going to grab it with some tweezers because it just cuts it really, really short. And I can't get my hands in there. So there it is. There's my bobbin thread. So now I have a top thread and a bobbin thread both pulled up. So I can bury those threads later because I am actually starting in the center of my quilt with a pinwheel. Okay. At this point again, I just lower it down and I can already tell it's not going to be where I want it. So I'm going to move my quilt there. Now, what you can't see necessarily, and maybe you can, my white fabric is a little higher than my red fabric. When I stitch, I'm going to try and stitch along this ditch as best as I can. This is a whole lot of fun. And right along the inside of this white because it's lifted. I don't want to be on the white if I can help it. So, sorry I hit the camera there. I'm getting my gloves on because it helps. And I am going to attempt to start stitching. I'm going to hold my top and bottom so they're out of the way. And I'm going to take my hands and try to spread the fabric a little bit so I get more of that ditch. Oh, before I even start, I'm actually going to lower my threads length to, I'm going to do 1.8. All right. I'm going to start to stitch and I'm going to do the best I can to stay along that stitch line. Now, it's awesome if you're not watching the needle. A lot of walking feet will have a piece of metal in the front. Okay, if that is your case, I highly suggest that you put a little, take your Sharpie black marker and put a little line so you know where you need to go. Another thing that's awesome, if you have even a wider open foot, you know, the foot is actually an open toe, more open toe than what I have. That actually allows you to see better. But you want to try and stay along that stitch, keeping your hands so that they are opening up that seam line. So you're stitching in it the best that you can. Now, I'm going to leave my needle down. This is a great function. I'm going to lift my presser foot. I'm at the end. Now, I'm going to turn my quilting. Okay, so I have to turn the fabric. So the needle down function is on. All right, I'm going to lower the presser foot. And I'm going to stitch right along that ditch. Okay, I'm going to lift that presser foot, needle down. I'm going to turn this again. Now notice, I don't roll it, I just scrunch it. Now, everybody has their own preference. Everybody has their own way of doing things. I'm a scruncher, not a roller. I'm going to lower my presser foot. It is actually lined up really nice. I'm going to come back to the middle. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to finish this part up and you can see how I'm switching around all my fabric, but then I'm going to do a stripe, okay? we go. Turn it again. Just gonna shove it in there, making sure everything's flat. Okay, so we're gonna sew along. Turn it again. Try to sew along that ditch. Right back to the center. Turn it again. I think I have one left, and then I'm going to show you when I do a strip or a stripe. Needle down, give it a turn. All right. Come to the end, give it another turn. Turn all the fabric. Yeah, this is a lot of fun. Now I will tell you, this was just the pinwheel, okay? So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to lift my presser foot, lift my needle, pull it somewhere out in Nova Scotia, put my presser foot down and hit the cut button. What that's going to do is it's going to give me quite a bit on the top thread, and it's also going to give me quite a bit on the bobbin. So I can bury those threads later. All right, now I'm going to reposition this, and I'm just going to sew a little bit on a stripe or a chevron, so you can actually see this again up close. And I'll eventually get this done off camera, but I want to show you how I keep stitching in a ditch. So I'll be right back. Okay, so I'm just going to do this last stripe with you. But before I get started, I don't know if I explained it well enough. And I'm not sure how much you can actually see, but my blue fabric is actually higher. It's got like a little lip, and it's a little higher than my white or this white over here. And the reason for that is because when I pressed my seams, this one I happened to press towards the dark side, and all that extra fabric in the seam allowance actually gives it the elevation and makes it seem like it's a little higher. So when I stitched in the ditch, yes, I'm trying to get in that stitch, so that's why I pulled just a little bit on the fabric to get in there. But if I actually sew on the white side, on the low side, this lip will actually help hide that stitching. Now it's going to be interesting because I'm having a lot of trouble seeing at this angle through the camera. But we're going to go ahead and try and get this done. So again, I'm going to lower, hit that button. And if you remember, my machine cuts my bobbin thread really short. So I'm coming in here, lift this up a little higher. Pull that on out. There we go. I'm going to lower this down again. And grab those tweezers, man. I love my tweezers. Just like I use my walking foot a lot, I use those tweezers a lot. Okay, so I'm going to attempt to stitch on this side of the line. And yes, I'm going a little slow because I'm having a hard time seeing here. Just keep on going. Almost through. Fabric's getting a little crazy. There we go. And again, I'd leave my needle function down, lift my presser foot, and turn the fabric, turn it this way, and then I would go along and stitch in this stitch. And it happens to be, I was looking at it, the white over here is higher than the blue because I pressed the seams towards the light instead of towards the dark. I did that to help match points. So when I go to stitch on this line, I'm going to stitch on the blue side, and that way it'll whenever that I'm done stitching, that lip helps to hide that stitching. That is how I stitch in the ditch. So now you know. If you like this video, please like, share, and subscribe. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to drop them in the comments below, or you can come by at 3 p.m. today, Eastern Standard Time, on our Facebook page. The link's down below, and I'll be there live to answer any questions that you may have, and maybe to share something that I see that maybe I want to talk a little bit further about. But yeah, I'm going to get back to getting this beauty done, get that stitched in the ditch, have a little fun doing it. I will see you again, if not today, at 3 p.m. on Facebook. I'll definitely see you next Wednesday. But until then, may y'all continue to stay healthy, inspired, productive, and joyful, and never stop making your dreams in quilting come true. Love y'all. See you soon.